Because it fixes a broken system, left and I affirm result. On balance, a one-day national primary would be more beneficial for the United States than our current presidential primary process. Contention 1, one person, one vote. The disproportionate impact of early voting states and sequential primaries deprives later states of equal representation. Elaine Carmark of the Brookings Institution explains in 2015, the first primaries become the place where the field of candidates is narrowed and the winner gains all-important momentum to catapult them into later primaries. Empirically, Barbara Norander of the University of Arizona found winning New Hampshire or Iowa extends campaigns 61 or 37% respectively in comparison to the average candidate. Further, Brian Knight of Brown University finds voters in states with early primary races such as Iowa and New Hampshire have up to 5 times the influence of voters in later states. This creates 2 harms. First, it disenfranchises voters in later states. John Martin, writing for the New Republic, finds in 2000 both Gore and Bush became unstoppable before 33 states had voted. In 2000, Kerry locked up the nomination when less than 3% of the nation's electorate had voted for him, and in 2012, by the time Romney became the de facto nominee, he had won a majority in just 3 states. If democracy requires consulting more than a fraction of voters, our nominating system is hardly democratic. Second, it produces unrepresented nominees. William Fry of the Brookings Institution finds the 2 early headliners ranked 5th and 2nd respectively on smallest racial minority electorate at 8 and 6% compared to 31% nationally. And both states have electorates which are older and considerably less urban than the nation as a whole. Shanna Markowitz of the Pacific Standard finds, this produces candidates chosen by a minority who are not representative of the actual makeup of the country, but are the candidates that voters must pick between on the November ballot. A one-day national primary would grant equal voice to all, increasing political enfranchisement and representation. Contention 2, turnout. Low voter turnout in current sequential primaries harms governance for 2 reasons. First, it decreases government efficiency by increasing polarization. Paul Steenkiss writes for Stanford University, while the majority of Americans are politically moderate, the most polarized voters go to the polls in greater numbers in primaries. The smaller the voter pool, the more weight a single vote carries, and the more a partisan minority can determine an election's outcome. This increases dangerous partisanship and decreases cooperation on policy. Nolan McCarty of Princeton explains in 2015, Congress is far less willing to delegate policy-making authority to executive agencies when there are significant ideological disagreements between the president and congressional majorities, and relies far less on the expertise of the bureaucracy in the implementation and enforcement of statutes, leading to excessive statutory constraints. Second, distorting the policy that is implemented. Jan Laley of American University finds people with higher levels of education and income with more conservative economic views are far more likely to cast ballots. As a result, Sean McElwee writes for The Atlantic, in low turnout elections, politicians are incentivized to cater to the interests of a small portion of the general public and are likely to spend less time on bills relating to housing, welfare, and health care. A one-day national primary would increase voter turnout and reduce these harms in 2 ways. First, by simplifying the nomination process. Norander explains, a single national date would reduce voter confusion and increase turnout. Second, by making citizens, especially in later states, feel like their vote matters. According to Rhodes Cook of the University of Virginia in 2004, a national primary would make all votes meaningful since they would be cast concurrently and would thus likely increase voter participation. As a whole, Bruce Altschuler of the State University of New York finds in 2008, there's no doubt that voter turnout in a national primary would be considerably greater than in the current system. In turn, lower income, less educated, and younger voters would likely constitute a greater percentage of the total. A report from the University of Virginia concludes, a national primary day could keep party nominees more in line with mainstream views. Vote for progress, vote pro.
Can you tell me which night study you're reading? Just what the date is.
Yeah.
204.
No, it's the 2011.
2011? We'd like to run some fast matches. To stop rep, those 25 seconds used.
Rebuttals? Urban? We negate the resolution. Contention 1 is cluttering the field. According to Mark Melman of the LA Times in 2012, early primaries are what winnows down the pool of candidates by field testing them for other voters. Candidates with an unappealing message simply cannot survive many early losses due to drying of finances. A one-day primary would eliminate this process and clutter the field with candidates. There are 3 detrimental impacts to this. First is more radical candidates. Martin Hutchinson of the Wall Street Daily in 2015 asserts potential nominees move to more extreme positions to distinguish themselves in a bigger field. Second is splitting the vote. Mattia Polburn of the University of Illinois in 2015 explains that when 2 candidates have similar views, a one-day primary will split their voter base, while a longer system will lead to one dropping out and a consolidation of support. For example, Polburn asserts that in the 2008 election, Obama and Edwards were splitting votes, and Obama only got the boost to overtake Clinton after Edwards dropped out. Polburn quantifies that in a one-day primary, the candidate who actually has the most support, or Obama in this example, loses 34% more often due to vote splitting. Polburn concludes, quote, vote splitting would be a severe problem in a simultaneous primary system, and that it therefore would perform substantially worse from a welfare point of view than the current sequential system. Third is winning with a plurality. Andrew Bush of the Brookings Institute in 2003 explains that as the vote is divided among the many candidates, the winning candidate often achieves a plurality, the highest percentage of support, instead of a majority. James Langan of the Williams and Mary College in 2005 asserts that plurality winners have less legitimacy and public confidence than majority winners, making policymaking harder and even inspiring cynicism in voters. Additionally, brokered conventions, which presently occur if a single candidate does not receive the majority of delegates from the primaries, becomes more common. De Silver of Pew Research in 2016 explains, quote, should the first ballot not produce a nominee, most delegates become free to vote for whomever they wish, leading potentially to multiple ballots, horse trading, smoke-filled rooms, favorite sons, and other colorful elements. De Silver finds that in 1/3 of brokered conventions, a dark horse candidate who began with very few votes from the American people becomes the nominee. Such candidates are so unrepresentative of the people that they are more than 15% more likely to lose the general election. Contention 2 is voter education. Subpoint A is less campaigning. Hemlata Vasada of the Seattle Times in 2011 explains that having a national primary would have candidates enter the race later and could limit the campaign to less than a year. This is impactful as campaigning brings information, anticipation, and motivation for Americans. Ultimately, in a meta-analysis of existing academic research, William Benoit of Wayne State University in 2007 finds that political advertising alone increases voter knowledge by 21%. Subpoint B is fewer presidential debates. A one-day primary would additionally lead to fewer presidential debates, as a typical schedule of specific debates tailored to key primaries would be obsolete, as everyone votes together. For example, this year there were 20 primary debates, while only 3 scheduled for the general election. Moreover, with more candidates able to stay in longer, Hutchinson points out that with 10 candidates arguing in a debate stage, it is hard for discourse to be productive. McKinley and O'Fine explains the harmful effect of this decline as, quote, debate viewing promotes awareness, knowledge, and the likelihood of participating in the political process. Benoit in 2010 concludes that the primary debates increase knowledge of candidates' issue positions in 83% of viewers. For example, after watching the debate, the number of people who could identify a candidate's top spending priorities doubled. The University of Copenhagen in 2015 quantifies that more informed individuals are 10% more likely to vote. Ilya Soman of Cato in 2004 explains the inherent benefit of voter education. Quote, inadequate voter knowledge prevents government from reflecting the will of the people in any meaningful way. Casey of Stanford in 2015 quantifies that after watching just one debate, people were 9% more likely to vote for a candidate whose position aligns with their own. Finally, Benoit finds that exposure to advertising increased turnout by 7%, so an increased process would be better. So for all these reasons, I urge a strong value. Thank you. Are yours the crossbar one?
First question. So your impacts in your first contention about cluttering basically say that these primary nominees are more likely to lose in the general election. At the point when both primary nominees are less likely to win, what is the impact? Like, why does it matter?
Well, there are multiple impacts. Firstly, we don't get the candidate who receives the most support because we tell you in our second impact that the people who have similar views get their voter base split because everyone votes at the same time.
Sure.
Secondly, we tell you that all voters become disenfranchised because
Why?
in a brokered conventions, delegates are released and they can vote for whomever
Let's
they
talk
want.
about brokered conventions.
Okay.
So what's the likelihood of a brokered convention now, and what's the likelihood of a brokered convention with the national primary?
Well, I can't give you the exact numbers because we don't have a national primary, but in the status quo, it's at
So
pretty
why
low.
does a brokered convention, why is it more likely to happen with the national?
Because there's so many more candidates, right?
Okay,
We don't
why
have
are there
this
so many
winnowing.
more candidates?
Can I
Like,
finish?
okay,
Well,
yeah.
we don't have this winnowing down process.
Okay, sure.
So on the Republican side, we will see all 17 or all 16 of the people stay in.
Isn't the field winnowed even before the primary starts?
Well,
Like
there
with
were
the Democratic nominee, 3 of the 6 dropped out even before the primary.
Well, yeah, there were a couple of them that dropped out, but we
Sure.
see that most of the people dropped out only after they got field tested in Iowa.
What do you mean?
We see it on the
50% dropped out
Republican
before.
side. Well, that's on the Democratic
Sure,
side. On
yeah.
the Republican side, it went from 16 before Iowa to 10 after Iowa.
Well, no,
Now,
it
can I
went
ask
from,
you
okay,
a
no,
question?
5 Republican nominees dropped out even before the primaries, 5 of 17. That's still a substantial margin, it's still being winnowed even before the primaries start, right?
No, but the thing is that, like, we're gonna see even less, right? Like, with only polling happening beforehand,
Okay.
we're not gonna see the people dropping out. So
Sure.
can I ask you a question? Okay, so you talk about the disadvantages of going later, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so why did California vote to move their primary back 4 months?
I don't know, you tell me.
Well, so first of all, there's not always, you claim that it's always a disadvantage of going last, right?
Yeah,
But
I
the
don't
thing
know
is,
why they would do
when
that,
it-
because it disadvantages them more.
So one of the reasons is, like, in a competitive race, it's actually better to go last.
Why?
Like we saw in the 2008 election between Obama and Clinton, it's better to go last because your vote is, like, it matters more.
Wait,
because
why?
you're the deciding
Okay,
vote, right,
if-
between
okay.
the two competitive
If you
races.
can only vote for Trump, like if I'm a California Republican, who could I have vote for, like in the primary process?
Well, only
It was
Trump.
only Trump,
But I would
right?
argue that, like, Trump would have won the nomination either way, so it didn't
Wait,
matter.
why? What do you mean?
Because Trump
Right,
was polling
exactly.
at a very
So
higher
their votes
rate,
don't
right?
matter.
No, but the thing is, it wouldn't have mattered where they voted. But what we
Why?
tell you is that in a competitive race, where their vote actually does matter, their vote matters significantly more, because
Give
then
me an
there's only
example of this.
like the 2008 election, right? It was
2008?
drawn, right, yeah, between Clinton and Obama on the Democratic side. It was drawn out all the way to June. So people, we saw both Obama and Clinton campaigning heavily
Even
in
at
California.
the at the
because
end, Obama
it's
had
such a
such
large
a
state.
substantial lead that it basically didn't matter that Clinton or that
Then why
California
did they
was
both
winning.
campaign heavily in California?
Like there was such a substantial lead that he just wanted
There
to
was
secure
no
the nomination.
substantial lead.
Dalton, you guys running around?
Yeah, we are. Alright, that's good for prep time, 12 seconds. Alright, so for an off-time roadmap, I'm going to do an overview of the con case and then just responses. Is everybody ready?
Just 2 seconds. Please say that again, you're starting
I'm
on,
going to do an overview to their case and then just go down it.
okay, thank you.
Everybody good? As an overview to our opponent's case, realize that for a democratic process to be legitimate, it has to have support from a people, and that's exactly what occurs with a national primary, but doesn't occur in the current system. According to Caroline Tolbert of the University of Iowa in 2009, 73% of people support a national primary. Kenneth Baer of the Democracy Journal finds that this is a long-term phenomena, but since 1952, Gallup polling has consistently shown that Americans prefer a national primary to the current system. That's an a priori reason to vote pro today's round because the people want a national primary. Looking at our opponent's case, in their first contention, they talk about cluttering the field. First, realize they don't give you a warrant as to why this is true, but rather it won't happen for 3 reasons. First, there are going to be candidates dropping out before the primaries occur, as happens in the status quo. As Eileen brought up in Crossfire, in the last Democratic Party nomination cycle, Chafee, Webb, and Lessig all dropped out before the first primary. That's half the field. Second, even if there are more candidates, ranked choice voting can allow for perfect coordination with a national primary. According to Rob Ritchie of Fair Vote just last week, a national primary should use ranked choice voting, which allows for perfect coordination as voters list their candidate preferences in order. Third, even if they don't use ranked choice voting, a runoff election will occur with a national primary. Past congressional proposals, like those of Representative Q in 1975 and 77, include a runoff election in the event that a candidate doesn't receive a majority. At that point, none of our opponents' impacts stand. But the second main problem with our opponent's impact is that there's no impact in the status quo because of what they're talking about still occurs. Take, for example, this past Republican nomination cycle where there are a lot of establishment candidates and the vote splitting they talk about still occurred as Trump got the nomination. But third, if coordination like they talk about in vote splitting stopping does occur, then they coordinate to the wrong candidate. Helios Herrera of Columbia University warns in 2012 that coordination based on early state results is very dangerous and oftentimes produces the worst candidate because of what we show you in our first contention about how they're unrepresentative states. But then going down, our opponents talk about winning with a plurality and talk about how they increase the chance of a brokered convention. First, they don't give you the actual probability of a brokered convention in the status quo, and they also never show you how much it's going to increase with the national primary, so you can't weigh it. But second, their impact at the end of this argument of decreasing general election competitiveness doesn't actually apply in today's round because that probability increases for both parties, so they're equally disadvantaged. But third, you can turn this argument against our opponents because you eliminate the possibility of a brokered convention in the pro-world when you have a runoff election because the people can choose rather than delegates. In our opponent's second contention, subpoint A, they talk about decreasing campaigning. First, realize that campaigning can occur in either world. You can just push it back. There's no reason why that's not true. Second, the current longer process actually decreases voter learning because voters become apathetic with the long process. Daniel Roberts of the University of Tennessee finds the actual effect of the long primary cycle is voter annoyance. It annoys voters so that they actually leave the political system and don't learn as much as they would otherwise. But third, if with a longer campaign, you actually increase special interest funding in the elections, which increases misinformation. Martin Waskall of the Orange County Register reports in 2015, the longer the campaign, the increase the amount of special interest money to fund those campaigns and advertising. That's dangerous because Kenneth Winning of the University of Arizona warns, after an analysis of the 2012 primaries, that 56% of all outside money going into primaries goes to misleading information. That's really dangerous because it completely turns our argument. The longer the campaign, the more misinformation is being thrown at voters. Then in our opponent's subpoint B, they talk about fewer debates happening. First, there's literally no reason why we can just move the debates earlier and have all those primary debates at an earlier date before the one-day national primary. Second, when you actually look at the debates our opponents talk about, they aren't actually that helpful for voters. The first way this has happened is because it's just confirming people's views, not actually changing them. For this reason, John Sides explains in 2016 that an analysis from 1960 to 2000 found no case where there can be any substantial shift in the candidates after the debates. Then the next problem with our opponent's analysis is that when they talk about this impact to a 10% increase in the likelihood of vote, they don't tell you the right line for information. Then the final response to turnout is exactly what we show you in our second contention, where you can cross a by how we're simplifying the process with a national primary and making people feel like their votes matter. So for all of these reasons, we urge a pro ballot.
Can you see the 1975 and 77 bills?
The bill, you want the text of the bills?
Yeah, if you have it.
Sure.
Or the runoff.
It's highlighted in each of the summaries, which are right there. That's the first one.
Okay, thanks. Sure. Judges, we'll run a little bit. We'll stop there.
So I'm going to be on their flow the whole time, and just like from one overview,
Not alive. Is everyone ready? The first overview shown I give is the fact that they read no dates in their case. We think this is important in today's round because we already had to call for one date, and as you'll see later in my speeches, dates are especially important in this actual topic where evidence is changing every single second. At this point, it's too late. If we call for all their evidence, that wastes our prep time. There's irreparable time skew. I don't make this as theory, you just automatically drop them, but I would argue they're going against NSDA rules and they make this debate less educational. But now let's go to the contention one person, one vote. First, we would argue there are benefits to going first. Aileen simply can't explain why California voted to move back. That's because what we tell you is your vote matters more in the end. She asked for an example, and Cho told her twice that in 2008, the later states had the most influence. This is really key because California and Maryland have done this in the last 2 election cycles, actually moving backwards. Another one of the reasons is actual money, but we argue if California thinks saving a few $1,000,000 is worth this risk of whatever their contention is, let them choose. Ultimately, you want one person, one vote. Let the states choose where their actual primary goes. There's nothing more democratic about that. But now, specific to their argument. First, when you talk about their night study, there are 2 responses. This study is from 2011. In 2012, they changed the system, and this is why we called for the date, because in 2012, they changed the system so Iowa, New Hampshire, and the earlier primaries aren't winner-take-all, specifically to decrease momentum. But the second reason we called for the date is because Knight in 2015 then did the study again, and he concludes that there is a trade-off between creating equality of states in their system. What he says is the trade-off is big-name candidates are more likely to win, and Knight concludes that in scenarios where the big-name candidate has a big lead, it's better to do our current sequential primary process. An example for this is Jeb Bush. At the beginning of this election, everyone Republican thought Jeb Bush was going to win, and he had a lot of momentum. But what Knight tells you is in that election, it's better to do our system because he gets field tested and people realize that he's not what America wants. But secondly, according to Desgupta in 2006, less voter education is the real problem to bandwagoning effect. They tell you these early states force other people to choose, but that's not the case. We turn this with voter education because they tell you when people aren't educated, they just vote what they see the polls or earlier states are doing, so that turns this argument. But now group their disenfranchised and unrepresentative together. First, what we tell you is the winner doesn't always win. Ted Cruz, Santorum, and Huckabee are the last 3 Republican winners of Iowa, and none of them won the race. Obviously, no one's listening to these states. But even more importantly, the one who did win last was Obama. That turns their minority representative. We would argue he's more representative. But secondly, when you look to the loser of these races, we would argue if you do have a good message, you'll be winning in national polls anyways, so there's no reason to drop out like they're telling you that Iowa makes you drop out. If you have a good message in later minority states, you would stay in because of polling data. But now on the unrepresentative point specifically. First, we tell you South Carolina has 23% African-American population. They vote third. Nevada votes early. They have a higher Hispanic population. Fry in 16 did an analysis and told you that in Super Tuesday states, on the whole, actually have more minority representation than the rest of the entire nation. So that turns this argument here. But now let's talk about their contention too about a decrease in turnout. I want you to weigh voter education more importantly for 2 key reasons. The first one is the Soman evidence Lofton drops from our contention too that tells you uneducated voters will vote specifically for policies the political elite manipulate them into, policies that are bad for them. We say the resolution says more beneficial to the United States. If we send people to random voting with low education, that turns their impact. But secondly, the evidence we read at the bottom of our case that Lofton's only response is no bright line tells you educated voters vote 10% more. They don't give a single quantification of their biggest impact being voter turnout. But really quickly on their 2 impacts, starting at the beginning of increase in polarization and distort current, they give you no bright line for this as well. They never tell you what policies aren't being passed, but we're trying to impact winning voter education and winning voter turnout. But here's the problems with their 2 warnings. First comes from Simplify. We argue this is absurd. If you don't know your primary date, you literally just Google it. It's voter apathy that stops it. 35% of people who could be registered are unregistered voters. It's not a problem with using Google. But the turn comes from Patterson of Harvard in 2011 that tells you when you put these states together, the little guy doesn't think he matters, and there's 4% less voter turnout. Finally, on Schuler, they tell you there's no quantification here. California votes near the last. They have the 5th highest representative voter turnout. Oregon votes 2nd last. They have the 2nd highest voter turnout. Their numbers simply don't match their arguments.
During crossfire, 84%.
Yeah, I'll just get that right now. I have it right here. Are our judges ready?
Alright, yeah. So, why do we not have literacy tests in the United States to vote? I would say because we should allow every single person to vote, and that education doesn't matter in voting, right? Because it's just about capturing the people's preferences.
So I'd argue if you're talking about pure democracy, voter turnout is more important than voter education. But the resolution doesn't say democracy, it says what's better for the United States. So the cold drop Soman analysis tells you what's better for the actual people is voter education because you vote for policy that actually matches you. For example, like the debates, we tell you 9% more likely after watching one debate to vote for a candidate that actually cares about.
Okay, so here's the problem. You can't take that elitist view where only people who know about the candidates should actually vote, because then that leads us down a slippery slope where we don't actually care about the people in a democracy, and we're just doing what's best. That justifies an autocracy, that justifies any candidate who's supposed to be doing the best thing ever,
You're kind of
right?
misconstruing what I'm saying. We use it as a simple weighing mechanism.
Yeah, so
We're
what
telling
I'm
you
saying is
even
that
if
we
not-
always have to prioritize democracy a priori, because otherwise it leads us to dangerous policies and electing
Okay,
dangerous
no, you
politicians.
can't impact the policies. I'm impacting
Why?
your policy through so much of less education. The resolution says what's more beneficial for the United States, what's not what's more democratic. Unless you're gonna read like some specific
And I'm explaining-
democracy impacts. Like you're just saying like democracy is good. I'm telling you it's not good to vote and get manipulated by political elites like someone tells you and gets a policy that screws you over. That's
They're
not
still
democracy.
making their own choices.
Okay. But
Right,
they're
so you have
not
a
good
question?
choices. Sure, yeah. So the question I want to ask you comes from like an attack on your case, right?
Okay.
First, the overview. You say like, listen to the majority of people,
Right.
right? So the majority of people wanted to go into Iraq. Does that mean Congress should have listened to them or looked to the cold hard?
Yeah, I would say at the time, given that we're in a democracy and the majority of people thought that we should have gone into Iraq, that was the right choice.
Sure. So majority
there
of
are
people
going
thought
to be
slavery was good. You
No,
didn't
no,
know
no.
that.
So here's the problem. Sure, there are going to be mistakes sometimes, but the general guide in designing a democratic institution, specifically an election, is to follow the voice
So
of the people.
Lofton, you're telling these judges don't look at this
No.
resolution on balance. And if they actually find that pro is worse for America, they should just default
Okay.
to 73% of
No,
Americans.
here's the difference between what you just said and what we're advocating
Okay.
for. You're talking about a policy choice that the government makes. What we're talking about is the heart of the democratic institution. The election itself has to be democratic if it's going to have a
But
democratic
Lofton,
result.
I would argue that this is a policy decision of these three gentlemen here. They get to decide whether we have a national primary or a one-day.
Sure.
And if the national is worse for the United States, then they shouldn't do it. So we say look to a cost-benefit analysis of what's better for the United States.
Okay, but can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So in response to our second contention, you say that people can just Google the primary and that's just apathetic. But at the point when we show you that it would clearly be a lot easier for people, say even they are apathetic, but they may vote if they find out when the date is, you're still increasing turnout some, right?
This argument is totally ludicrous. You're
Why?
telling people literally don't know what day their primary is.
I don't know
That's
the
not
date
what
of my
vote.
primary was. It's on a random day.
So,
All of
if
these
you
people have
actually
different
cared
days.
about voting, I would
Yeah.
say you'd look it up.
Sure, so a lot of people are going to do that, but a ton of people aren't. Not everybody in the United
Wait,
States
so
cares
there's
a ton
someone
about voting.
who's like on his way out the door to vote, and he's like, I don't know what day my primary is, and then just doesn't vote.
They're not allowed out of their door because they're asleep because they don't know it's the day.
Okay, but still, what I tell you is if they actually care, remember, 35% of voters are unregistered. It's not a
Right, and that's
Could be
because of a variety of
registered.
other factors, like things that
Like
inhibit
what?
registration, because that's really difficult to do,
Okay,
right?
or
Like in a lot of
maybe
states,
like a
that's
lack of
difficult to do.
education.
You might not have an IT, you might not do things like that.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, you can do that.
we're good with that, and then we'll run some prep time. Alright, that's fine, we've got 15 minutes.
Alright, so roadmap, I'm gonna do 2 overviews and then 1 voter and then their okay. Alright.
Democracy
democracy isn't a spectator sport. Let's start off with the overviews. The first overview is addressing their overview and rebuttal. They tell you that we need to be reading dates. We can give them the dates regardless of the prep time. They don't have to read it for us to tell the dates. That's irrelevant. The second overview is what Lofton tells you in his rebuttal. Remember that the whole point of an election is assuming that the majority opinion is the right one. They're going to come up here and tell you that sometimes the majority is wrong. But if you believe that, there's no point in having a democratic election at all. At the point where the majority of people in the United States want a national primary, we should have a national primary just to uphold the benefits of democracy. That's the first way you can affirm. But the second way you can affirm, and this is the main voter on our case, is through increasing turnout. We show you two ways in which this happens. First is simplifying the nomination date. When everyone knows when the when the primary is, more people are going to be voting. They tell you that we can just Google it, but not everyone has access to these technologies. And second of all, they say it's because of voter apathy. Remember the term Lofton tells you. Voter apathy happens with a longer primary process. With a national primary, you decrease voter apathy and you increase turnout. But second of all, they tell you that when these primary dates are clustered at one time, they don't feel like their vote matters as much. But that's empirically untrue according to Cook. And Altschuler tells you that when the states are earlier and they feel like their vote actually matters, they're more likely to vote. And they try to tell you that later states have had higher turnout rates in this election cycle, but generally that's not true. And this one is just because of the demagogues riling up everyone's voting. At that point, turnout outweighs their information for a couple of reasons. First of all, even if people are informed, if they're not going out to vote, it literally doesn't matter for the political process. But second of all, remember the terms that we put on information. First of all, we're going to be increasing apathy by extending the primary process. Second of all, we're increasing deceptive ads because it's going to cost more. Remember that 56% of these campaign ads are actually deceptive. They're not actually learning more information. And when they talk about cluttering, three reasons this is going to happen. First of all, there won't be more because they're going to drop out before the primaries because of polls. Second off, even if this is true, runoffs solve the problem and eliminate the possibility of a broker convention. So for all these reasons, we affirm.
Bear with me. It's going to be overviews, their case briefly, our contention 2, our contention 1. Okay.
Sorry, one more time. Overviews, their case 2-1.
Their case 2-1. Yeah. Cool. Okay. All right. So, these are my judges. First, let's start with our overview that about 73% of people want it. My opponents come up here and try to make a logical fallacy. We come up here and tell you that empirically people wanted slavery and that was bad. And this is another instance, right? People aren't educated about a one-day national primary. My opponents come up here and try to tell you that, oh, if we shouldn't listen to the majority opinion, we shouldn't have a democratic process at all. But the only difference is that when we elect a candidate, people are actually informed. Whereas a one-day national primary, not many people know about it. So we should do a holistic analysis because the resolution says on balance. Now, furthermore, my opponents come up here and try to tell you that dates aren't important, but it's a NSDA NSA rule. If you ignore NSA rule, it deteriorates the value of debate. Now let's move on to their case briefly. Extend Arvin's turn, the Patterson analysis from Harvard, which specifically quantifies that when you group national primaries together, you decrease voter turnout by 4%. They called for the analysis, looked at it, and didn't respond to it whatsoever. That's another voter in today's round. Now with that in mind, let's move on to our contention 2 about voter education. My opponents come up here and try to tell me that voters are apathetic, but firstly, this is non-unique because it happens in most worlds, and second, my opponents can't quantify it. And also, my opponents come up here and try to tell you that misleading ads are bad, but don't forget the Benoit meta-analysis, which isn't just one study. It looks to all academic literature and finds that advertising and campaigning increases information on matters by 21%. But for this analysis, because it's just all academic literature, not just one specific cherry-picked study. And furthermore, that doesn't even take into consideration the fact that there's going to be fewer debates. We tell you that the fact that there's going to be debate before every primary becomes obsolete. We won't have an Iowa debate, New Hampshire debate. So there's going to be fewer debates. And as a result, we're going to see less knowledge. Because according to Casey of Stanford, one debate increases the likelihood of people choosing a proper candidate by 9 percentage points. And don't forget the Soman analysis from Cato that voter knowledge is better than voter turnout because people choosing a proper candidate is really important. Now let's move on to our contention 1 briefly. My opponents come up here and tell you about 2 plans, which is about ranked choice and runoffs. This is not allowed in public forum debate. Don't allow them to cherry pick 2 specific bills. So we're going to see the splitting of the vote and more candidates being bad. And for all these reasons, I have a strong conduct.
You guys want to just turn around like
Yeah,
this?
that works.
Yeah. If you don't mind even standing, just so we can see you.
Oh yeah,
Sorry, I know
It's like a
late.
million people.
Yeah.
Alright, are our judges ready? Okay, go ahead, Lachlan.
Okay, we're good, okay. So you guys keep talking about how you can't assume that the majority is right. So why do we still have primaries in the United States to determine who the nominee
That's a good
is?
question. So I'm not saying to disenfranchise people. I'm telling the judges as policymakers in public forum need to make a decision of weighing impacts.
Right.
And they should never weigh just getting a couple more people to turn out over something that's detrimental for the whole United States. It's a simple.
And also we told you that just because the majority says they want it, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily beneficial for all the United States.
Then why do we take so much legitimacy in our election system?
Right, exactly. But the thing is, there's a difference there, right?
Sure.
In this instance of moving to a one-day national primary, very few people are educated on it, right? People are just making they have misinformation. They're making false statements,
Let's
right?
talk about
Whereas
misinformation.
opposed to the democratic process or the primary system, right? People are constantly being informed.
Sure, so let's talk
So
about
no, wait,
So
misinformation.
there's a difference there.
Okay,
Okay,
this
let's
comes
talk
off from your runoff, right? So Cho
Sure.
argues that this is a plan because you give me 2 congressional bills. Over 100 have been proposed. I have a congressional bill that said there would be no runoff.
Right, we're
Can
looking
you
at the
give me
most recent ones.
what?
We're looking at the most
You
recent
looked
ones.
at 1975 and 1974.
Yeah, it
Mine is
hasn't
from,
been proposed recently.
mine is from 1974 and it says just popular will.
Yeah, ours is after that.
Like
1975 versus 1974.
Sure.
You're telling me,
But here you're
Either
missing
way.
the
You
bigger
guys are
picture.
cherry picking.
You're missing, okay, you're missing the bigger
how can you
picture.
fiat runoff?
Okay,
How can you
missing the
fiat a
bigger
runoff
picture.
election in a
That the
one-day
pro
vote?
in this debate to have an educational debate has to be able to talk about some specifics. So we don't give you just
No, but
one
the thing is,
specific
that's
plan.
unfair,
Well,
though, because-
okay, but let me finish explaining. We give you a variety of different options of what could occur. Ranked choice voting, a runoff election, any of these situations would be better than the
But
current
even
primary
if you
system.
don't want to look at that, remember, literally every other response Lofton gives you that you
No,
don't
but
But
the
understand.
thing
we're
is,
focusing
okay,
on this first.
But
Sure.
that makes it
Okay.
extremely unfair in this debate because that means we have to prep out literally every single
No,
bill
you just
that's
have to look
been
at the
proposed.
most recent ones.
No, but Lofton said
The
you can
most-
run runoff, you can run ranked choicing, or can you just
Yeah,
run?
runoff, like
You
sure,
can
like
run
we get the
whatever
most
you
recent
like. That
proposals.
seems
That's what's
completely
most likely
unfair.
to be
That's-
passed in
that
the
might
real
be an
world.
argument for
Regardless, you
policy,
dropped
not
the
for
5 other
politics.
responses
Right.
I make to that
No, you
argument,
make-
so it's
okay.
fine if you guys win
Yeah.
the argument.
Okay, sure, Lofton, you make
Yeah.
2 other responses on brokered conventions, which Show goes for it in the thing. So first you say there's a decrease.
Okay, wait, you guys never respond to this, and you can't respond
Yes,
now
he
or in
did.
second final.
Okay, I'll reiterate the responses
Okay.
from brokered conventions. First, you say your second response is there's a decrease in competitiveness. But we would argue brokered conventions increase because there's simply more candidates.
And your
Wait,
third,
okay,
your fourth
wait,
response
wait.
is again runoff.
Okay, your impact is that both candidates are less likely to
That's-
win.
Aileen,
There's
Aileen,
literally
we talked
no
about
impact
this.
to that in the general
Aileen,
election.
that's not what the
Yeah.
argument is.
Sure.
Look, I'm going to explain it because I'm going to spend about 30 seconds in final focus on brokered conventions now that you gave us runoff. What Show tells you is it's the ace in the hole because A, when you have a brokered convention, you have the elites pick the candidate so they don't pick a good candidate, they pick who
Right,
they
this
like.
isn't speech
And
time. Can I ask you guys a question
and
real
B,
quick before we end?
disenfranchises
Does
everyone.
information matter if people don't vote?
I'm sorry?
Does information matter if people don't
Well,
vote
you
using
dropped
that
the Soman
information?
analysis, which says
Okay,
that voter
can you answer
information
that
is a
question, please?
prerequisite
Yes
for
or no?
voting.
Yeah, so I'd say A, more informed voters vote more, that's the 10%, as well as that they make better choices.
We'll use our 14 seconds to prep time. Alright, is everybody ready? A national primary brings national representation. There are 3 reasons to vote pro. The first is that a majority of people want a primary. When you're designing an electoral institution, you have to look at what the people want. We've shown you consistently since 1950, people have preferred a national primary to the current system. Our opponents only try to say that people don't know about a national primary. A, that they know some about it, and B, they know about the current system and its current failings, and they want to have representation where they don't now. The second reason why you should vote pro is turnout in our second contention. We show you 2 ways in which this occurs. First, because of simplification, according to Norander, with a single date, people know it's easier, so you increase turnout. Second, by making later states feel like their vote matters. In the status quo, a lot of these early primaries are determining the nomination, so according to Cook, people's votes don't matter in the end, and that's why Elschleitzer finds that with a national primary, there is no doubt that turnout will substantially increase. Now, our opponents try to say that there's this 4% decrease in turnout in these later states later on, but realize that because these later states are clustered together, it's not an independent reason. A national primary will still increase that turnout. Now, this wins us the round for a couple of reasons. The first reason why it outweighs is that even if our opponents win their argument about more informed voters, it doesn't matter if they're not voting. Voting is actually a prerequisite to having that information. So at that point, you can clearly vote pro, and then the second reason why it outweighs is because representation is a fundamental element in our election process that must come before other things. But the third reason why you should vote pro is because of information, and this is actually really important because our opponents don't address a lot of what I say in rebuttal and Eileen extends in summary. And that's that first, you actually lose information because of voter fatigue. Remember, according to Roberts, with the long cycle that we have now, people just tune out of the political process and they don't get any of the information even if there is more advertising like our opponents say. Second, because there's more money in a longer process, you increase misinformation. According to by 56% of the ads in primaries have misinformation. Our opponents try to say that ads generally increase knowledge by 21%, but prefer ours because it's actually talking about primary elections in the United States. Our opponents are going to try to get up here and extend their first contention, which they drop most of. Remember the 3 first warnings we give about how candidates drop out before. Our opponents never respond to that fact, but furthermore, they never give you the probability of a brokered convention, so we're going to outweigh on probability. So for all of these reasons, we urge a pro ballot.
We'll run the remaining 7 seconds. I'm going overview, weighing, their voters, and then our 2. So pretty much show speech. Is everyone ready? Remember Show's overview of dates, which we would agree is a macro impact in today's round, actually influences education in this round that everyone's watching at NSDA Nats. But the second overview that we give is the idea of weighing. This is key in today's round because we argue what's best for the nation. You 3 are going to make a decision in today's round that will hurt America if just because they say more people want it. No policymaker would ever make that decision. This leads to a cost-benefit analysis, and this is the easiest way to pull the trigger for Show and I, and that's off the idea of brokered conventions. Show spends little time on it because it's very clear. Once they drop the runoff, they give that a counterplan. There's other Congress bills that don't have a runoff. We tell you that there's going to be more candidates in their field. Even if polls winnow some, they have more candidates. Sure, that doesn't quantify the probability of increase in brokered convention, but we would argue the magnitude outweighs the small increase in probability because it's the end-all be-all impact because A, a brokered convention causes the worst candidate to get picked because it's just the person who the people are best friends with, and secondly, it disenfranchises everyone because delegates can vote for whoever they want. Easiest way to vote for Sean Ryan. But the second impact comes from our weighing of voter education. Remember, this outweighs their idea of voter turnout because they're talking about you don't know the date. We would argue you could just Google it. Remember the Patterson analysis. This is key because it often makes the new response in final focus, but still Patterson quantifies a 4% decrease in voter turnout when you actually look to states voting on the same day. That's the only comparative analysis. That's the only number in today's round because they don't give you anything. They give you actual or saying it'll absolutely increase turnout. That's ridiculous. But we went off education because you weigh that higher, according to Soman, that uneducated voters going to the polls are bad for themselves and bad for America. That's bad in today's round. But we increase education through campaigns. Show reads the meta-analysis from Benoit that there's 21% increase in information just from the campaign. It's about discourse. This responds to their apathy, remember, because you're engaging people. People like watching the debates. That gets them off their butts and increasing in the voter education. But remember, when you have fewer debates in their world, you don't have the New Hampshire debate, you don't have the Iowa debate. That's the Casey, 9% more likely to vote for a candidate that cares about you after actually watching a debate. But even if you want to look to voter turnout, remember the 10% increase in voter turnout for more informed voters. That's the only quantified, we're the only team giving numbers, and for all of America, we are proud to be. Great job.